Well, today we're taking kind of a detour from what I normally do on the Vegan Visibility podcast show. First of all, I'm Kathleen Gage. I'm your host, and I'm really excited to be interviewing Chrissy Melanie Benson. And Chrissy actually is an author of a novel. And I'll tell you, I don't read novels, but she sent me the book. I started reading it. Now I can't wait to find out the twist and the turn. It's such an exciting book. It's called Marrying Yourself. And you can see I have my bookmark here. I am definitely enjoying it. And she is a vegan. So we're going to start with, how did you start your vegan journey? So Chrissy, welcome to the show.
Welcome to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show, where your host, Kathleen Gage, shines the spotlight on vegan and plant-based businesses and entrepreneurs from all walks of life committed to cruelty-free eating, healthy lifestyles, animal compassion, and the environment. Enjoy the show.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. It's really great to be here. And I'm so excited to talk about veganism and my book. It's like my two favorite things in one package.
And what I love is you've combined the two into one, because we're going to talk about what's in the book and how you've managed to put a twist in the vegan story. But let's start with when you first became vegan.
Sure. Well, I'd been vegetarian for quite a while. My thinking basically went like this. Sure, if it were a choice between starving to death and eating an animal, I'd probably eat the animal. But in this day and age, how can I justify making such a choice? So vegetarian, I was a committed vegetarian, but also a very ignorant one. I knew nothing about factory farming, nothing about the dairy industry or the egg industry. But then over time, a little more information started creeping in. Initially, it was about the egg industry and the conditions of the egg-laying hens, the cages that they were forced to live in, the fact that they never saw the light of day. So I started just getting increasingly uncomfortable continuing to consume those products. But I was a very non-vegan vegetarian. I lived on lots of non-fat Greek yogurt, egg whites, what I thought were healthy animal products. I later learned that I was mistaken in that assessment. But again, it started niggling at me, that feeling at my conscience about participating in that industry and consuming those products. And I knew myself, I knew I was just never going to feel comfortable, but I really was not eager to go vegan. But I just reached kind of a breaking point and thought, I know myself. I know I'm never going to be able to just eliminate that niggling feeling at my conscience. So I'm going to have to do it eventually. I may as well just do it now. And so that was the extent of my enthusiasm. But
and when was that?
The change. That was in 2011. I was living in New York City. It was shortly before Halloween, which I recall because suddenly that changed everything about Halloween candy. Most Halloween candy, of course, isn't vegan. And it was tough for about 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. It was hard. I went to a work conference and they had no non-dairy milk or creamer for the coffee, and that almost broke me. And I just remember feeling just very sort of victimized, like, oh, why do I have to be so morally conscious that I have to make this extreme sacrifice by foregoing all these delicious foods. So that was where I was. And then 3 weeks in, I saw a few movies. The movie Vegucated premiered in New York City. I went to see that, started reading a bunch of books. There was an online summit called Vegan Palooza that I listened to. And 3 weeks in, I became a hardcore animal rights vegan. I became radicalized via the internet. Is how I put it.
Well, it's pretty amazing how we can go from total oblivion of what the truth is, and then we get a little bit of information, and then we dig a little deeper and a little deeper. And when I started almost 5 years ago, I was a plant-based eater. I would not call myself vegan, and now my company is Vegan Visibility. I have Vegan Visibility Productions, and it goes on and on. And what shifted my perception was when I did the same thing that you did. I did research. I watched the documentaries. I was shocked and appalled at what I had learned because I used to wear leather. I prided myself in my Western boots, and they were made out of a certain kind of animal. And I had no clue. I was so disconnected. And so I love what you're doing with not only being vegan, but carrying the message into your book. And we'll talk about that shortly. But what I want to find out is in your vegan journey, you said first 3 weeks were pretty tough and you, oh, poor me, I can't have this and that. And then we kind of come to this realization. It's like, who is really the victim here? The animals are the victims. And so tell us more about your journey of going from, okay, I realized that I'm not going to eat animals anymore, to really becoming, if you will, a radicalized hardcore vegan.
Yes, and it was a journey. I was a committed vegan. I was convinced that that was the right path and the only right way to live. But it was honestly probably about a year before I became a more activist-minded vegan. Mm-hmm. I think I initially still thought of it as sort of a fluff issue. Yes, animals suffering is important, but there are so many other issues out there. I'm not going to claim that this is the most important one. And so that was also an evolution in my own thinking to, going from thinking, oh, this is kind of a fluff issue for people who maybe have a lot of time on their hands to think about these esoteric subjects, to really believing, as I do now, that no, this is the issue of our times. I mean, this animal suffering and the way we treat non-human animals, it's sort of the groundwork that's laid for all other forms of injustice and oppression and suffering that are inflicted on humans and non-humans alike. So it really was, just a gradual shift in my perspective. And it was through education. I read Will Tuttle's book, The World's Peace Diet, which was revelatory for me. And I read all kinds of philosophy books. I read Peter Singer's book, Animal Liberation. I read a book called Dominion by Matthew Scully. So I did lots of research, and I was living in New York City at the time, and that was a wonderful place to go vegan because there was a huge vegan meetup group. All these movies were always premiering. There were all these cool vegan restaurants in my neighborhood. So I just started absorbing all this information. And I remember one powerful moment was when I went to a memorial service for a historian named Rin Berry. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he was a longtime vegan, and he did a lot of research into the history of vegetarians and vegans, and he wrote several books on it. And he died while I was living in New York City. It was a really sad event. He was running, I believe, in Prospect Park in the winter, and he had an asthma issue and died. But there was a beautiful memorial service for him in New York, and I attended that. And because he had been a historian, a lot of the speakers at this lovely service talked about the history of vegetarianism and veganism. And I just learned so much. I learned that all of these people that I admired, like, Benjamin Franklin for a time, and Leonardo da Vinci, and Leo Tolstoy, and Walt Whitman, and just all these great thinkers and some of the most noble and admirable people in history had also arrived at this conclusion that no, this is not right to, inflict suffering on other beings, when it's completely unnecessary. And it really made me feel part of something much bigger than I am. And it also validated my perspective. Like, other brilliant minds have arrived at this same conclusion, and I'm not alone here. So it was a shift. And then it went from veganism just being a personal choice to becoming an activist in
Right.
my soul and in my spirit. Like, no, this is not right. And I can't just sit back and let this happen. It's not enough for me just to not participate in this. I have to do something
Absolutely.
to, end this.
Well, and I love what you're doing with your book, because what I came to realize is, I was an activist from way back when, when I was 12 years old, I actually was involved in a campaign to raise money for the soldiers in Vietnam for Christmas gifts. And, I had real mixed feelings at the age of 12 about the Vietnam War. My parents believed one way and I believed a different way. And yet
really?
I thought,
wow.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And, the soldiers, they were kind of the victims in a lot of
victims.
It's crazy. But with activism, what I thought when I first really identified as vegan was that I was going to become a nutritionist. I got my Cornell University certification, and I thought that was the path I was. Yes. Yeah, I think a lot of us do. And what I came to realize is our activism can happen in so many different ways. And I love what you said about that. This really is at the core of every issue that we have that's wrong with the world right now. Because if you look at the pain and suffering the animals go through, and then people take that into their body, into their psyche, into their spiritual side, they don't even realize why they have a lot of the emotions they do. And one book I would encourage you to add to your library is Eternal Treblinka, I believe it's called. And it's about the correlation between the Holocaust of people during the war and the Holocaust of animals. And some people say, oh, that's pretty radical. How can you compare the two? But they say that a lot of the inhumane treatment of people starts with animals. And so if we give ourselves permission to treat the animals poorly, so that, I love how you've really weaved your activism into your writing. And most of the books that we read are going to be nonfiction. They're going to be about the movement. They're going to be about factory farming. They're going to be about health and nutrition, whatever it may be. And I've only met a couple of people who are writing novels, and I love it. And your book, Marrying Myself, interesting story. I have to tell you, I am really wrapped up in it. I'm actually flying out in a couple of days to go to the NHA conference, and on the plane, I'm going to be reading this book. So tell us how you came to decide that you could actually use your writing as a form of activism to reach a market in a whole different way.
Yeah, it wasn't premeditated. I had started writing the book before I myself went vegan. I was a vegetarian, but not a vegan.
Okay.
And then after I made the vegan leap, and again, just really came to that really core belief that no, this is something that's really, really wrong. Of course, I couldn't have my protagonist in my book not, be anything but a vegan.
Right.
So I was only maybe a quarter of the way into the book, so I didn't have a ton of editing to do in that regard. So she became a vegan, and and then it just grew from there. I think it's funny because, as a novelist, I've been to a number of writers' conferences, and they teach you all these techniques and tropes and that sort of thing. And one of the rules in women's fiction and romance is that you can't have any animal abuse in there, like that's taboo. You can write about a lot of subjects, but you can't have someone, hurt an animal unless you want them to be a villain or something,
right,
unless you want to show that someone's evil. And by the same token, if you want to show that someone has some positive qualities, you can do, like a cat rescue scene or just a scene where they're kind to an animal. And it just was cracking me up at this conference last summer, hearing this advice from these seasoned, successful authors, but thinking to myself, yes, but people can eat a hamburger or a steak or, grilled salmon anytime in these books. That doesn't count as animal abuse.
That's interesting. And, and what what I think needs to happen is more conversation around this, because a lot of times people don't connect the dots. I know I didn't until I really started digging in. I thought, oh, vegans are so radical. I believed it was a cult. And then it hit me that no, actually compassion to animals is a really good thing. And that, I've been rescuing animals for years. We have 2 chickens that are rescue chickens, and they have about an acre of land that they live on. We've got 5 acres. And
Nice.
I was thinking about that as I was feeding them. They came to the back door and they were clucking and going, come on, it's time to feed me. And I thought, you 2 are so spoiled. Do you know how good you have it? And then I started thinking, and I felt the pain and suffering of the chickens that are in factory farms, and that people don't connect the dots on that. So with your book, how long did it take you from idea to completion?
Too long. It took over a decade.
Okay. Oh, well, okay. I've been working on my memoir for about 5 years now, so I don't feel so bad about that. And I've written probably 20 nonfiction books, spiritual business, digital marketing, all of that.
You're incredible. You're so prolific. And I
you.
aspire to be more like that. I plan to be more like that.
I could never, well, I'm not going to say I could never, but I really admire. And for the people that are watching, you can see the cover right here. And for those who are not, it's Marrying Myself. And where do they find this, Chrissy? Where's the easiest place to find the book?
People can check out my website, ChristsyMelanieBenson.com.
Okay.
That's probably the easiest place. And then the book is available in all the usual spots, okay, Amazon,
great.
Barnes and Noble, independent bookstores as well.
Wonderful. Well, I noticed, what bookstore did I see? You have it in Target, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe it is in Target. Yes.
I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. Yeah. That's
somebody
fantastic.
discovered that and informed me of that. And I thought that was really funny. I don't quite know how it was found that way, but yeah, it's everywhere.
That's fantastic. And I want to remind people that you're listening to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage, and I'm talking to Chrissy Melanie Benson, and we call Christine Chrissy for the show. And Chrissy, for people who are aspiring to write books, what is your advice? What are your recommendations?
Really, just to start to do it. I'm a big believer in the discipline of writing. Ideas come when you sit down to do it. And I certainly don't think everybody should write, has to write, needs to write. But if you have that in you, if you have that niggling feeling, just like I did before I went vegan, that there's a book you need to get out, then I would urge you to listen to that voice and just do yourself the service and do the world the service of honoring that, and just start. Just start and see where it goes. And, I'm always happy to give people advice about the publishing industry and how to navigate that whole world, because that was a learning experience for me. And so
let's dig into that. Yeah. Let's dig into that just a bit. And what would you say in your journey of working with a publisher? What was your greatest frustration and what was your greatest thrill?
Well, the greatest frustration, that's very easy, because that was the initial cover that they came up with for the book, which is not this cover.
Oh, really? Okay.
Which I love. They came up with a very different cover based on some style guidelines and some samples I had given them at their request. And then they came up with this book cover that to me looked like the cover of a Disney coloring book. I mean, it was pink and sparkly, which honestly, I love pink and I love sparkles, but it just looked very childish and very cheesy in a non-vegan way. It just was horrible. And I saw this cover and I just knew that cannot be the cover for this book. So I took matters into my own hands and actually sponsored a contest on a site called 99 Designs.
Yes, I'm very familiar with that.
Design the cover of the next women's fiction novel all your friends will be reading. And I got hundreds of amazing submissions. There were probably close to a dozen cover designs that I loved, any one of which I would have been delighted to have as the cover of my book. But this cover that you see here this one was the one that initially just drew me in and captured my attention. And I did conduct some polls and got outside input, but that was the one that I went with. And I'm very pleased with it. And then the second biggest frustration was the audiobook process. I'm happy that my book is now available in audio form, but I had no control over the production process.
Right.
And, I would have loved to have the chance to narrate my own book or just have some say in that. So it's not quite as I would have it, as they say, but it's still great to have an audiobook out
Absolutely.
in the world. I'm grateful that it exists.
Well, and it's one more audiobook than most people have. I don't even have an audiobook. I have a lot of, and it's interesting because I was thinking about this the other day. It's like if somebody were to go to Amazon and key in my name, you will find very little attached to my name. And the reason being is about a year ago, everything in my business was hacked, everything, including my Amazon account. So I shut everything down. Well, little did I know they would take everything off. And I've had people say, well, why don't you just upload it again? And it's so interesting because since becoming vegan, a lot of my perspective obviously has changed. And a lot of what I want to be known for with writing has definitely changed. But, going back to the whole thing of activism, my activism actually is working with companies, helping them to get visibility within the vegan market. And with what you do, have you ever had people who have said, like with the novel, oh, you can't write about that, nobody will read that? Have you ever had that happen?
I didn't have that happen, but I wondered if it would happen. And I wondered what the response would be, in my queries to literary agents and subsequently to publishers. I did wonder how much I should highlight the vegan component, how much I should downplay it. In earlier drafts of the book, I did have some people read the book and give me feedback for editing purposes. Right. And I made sure to have 2 vegans and 2 non-vegans because I wanted to make sure that the vegan component wasn't a turnoff to the non-vegans,
right?
Or even if it was a turnoff, if the story was just entertaining and fun and interesting enough to, sustain their interest despite their not being able to relate to the vegan aspect.
That's a great strategy. And I got to tell you, I am so looking forward to getting on the plane and reading the book because I have about, all told, that day, it's going to be about a 10-hour travel day. And so I have a lot of time to read. And I know that I'll be getting, because once I immerse myself in a book, I can't stop. And so, and that's saying a lot because I don't read fiction books. I just don't read them. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be having you on the show. I need to at least know what the book's about. And it's like, oh, darn, I wish I would have started this sooner. It's fascinating. So tell us how you came up with the concept for the book, what your writing strategies are. Like, did you sit down and you would say, okay, for the next hour, I'm going to write, or would you wait to be inspired? What's your strategy as a writer?
It's hard to say because I wouldn't say that my strategy is one that should necessarily be modeled because there's a lot more I could do and would like to do better in the future. That said, I've always been kind of a free agent professionally. So I do work that's project based. So often there'd be very intense stints of work followed by a break of a week or sometimes even a few months. And so I would use that downtime to focus on the book. So my writing was in fits and starts. And at a certain point, I went to a writer's colony outside of Nashville for 10 days to buckle down. And in this case, I had to cut the book, make the book shorter, because in the women's fiction genre, they have pretty strict word count limitations. So I needed to cut the book by about a third. So, it was an extended process. It was sparked by a random idea, casual conversation with a friend who initially wanted to co-write the book with me. And we started out with this plan of writing it together. But then it just became, I think it was an impulse on her part, and then she didn't end up, writing anything. And I just decided, well, I'm kind of sold and into this story, and I'll just finish it on my own. So it was really fun. It was really fun to write, and I honestly didn't take it that seriously because I was just having fun with it. Wanted to write a fun story. It was cool. You get to create your own imaginary worlds and your set of people. And my characters were always surprising me.
They just kind of pop up. Did you have characters that would just kind of like show up and you're like, oh, okay, here's a good character?
Sometimes, but more often it was that they already existed, but then they did things that I didn't expect they were going to do. So I don't want to give too much away, but
well, give a little bit of the storyline, because I do encourage people to get the book Marrying Myself, and it's a novel. Fascinating read. And I have to say that, again, as somebody who normally doesn't read fiction books, I am really, really engrossed in this. And I just can't wait. It's a page turner for sure. So give us a little kind of bird's eye view of what people can expect from the book.
Sure. Well, first of all, I appreciate those kind words so much, Kathleen. That means a great deal to me. And so the premise of the novel is that a woman living in Boston named Julia Jones, who, yes, is a vegan, is engaged to be married to the love of her life, her true soulmate. He also happens to be incredibly wealthy, although that's not why she's marrying him. And then I won't do a spoiler, but in a nutshell, things don't go quite according to plan. So it's a fun read. It's not dark or heavy, as I think, you can attest, Kathleen, but kind of with a deeper, almost spiritual message about figuring out who we are and what matters when the whole image we had of what our life was going to look like is suddenly just out the window.
And I think it's so fitting for the times, because I think now more than ever, people are questioning who they are, and they are questioning their values and their ethics. And have I been living a life aligned with what I say is true? And I think more than any other community I've been a part of, I've been in the sober community for 39 years now. I am married to my wife, have been with her for 33 years, and I'm in the vegan community. And I would say, more than anything in the vegan movement, it's very black and white. It is in the sober community too, but in the vegan community, you either don't eat animals or you do eat animals. There's no in between. And people do ease into it. But I just have to say, I love your activism. I love the way that and I look forward to seeing other works coming out of that creative mind of yours. Now, for somebody thinking about writing a novel, because, I've toyed with the idea, but honestly, I think it's like stand-up comedy, one of the hardest things to do. It's like, I can be funny, occasionally, and it kind of happens, but it's not like planned. And I don't think I could ever script it out. And it's the same with writing a novel. It's like, oh my gosh, I admire people who can do that. So for somebody who might be thinking about writing a novel, what are, 3 top strategies that you could share with them?
Okay, top 3, I would say 1, designated writing time, maybe half an hour is kind of a good manageable time, and just write. 2 is if you can find a writer's group. There are lots of writers groups, both in person and online, and having a community of people who also think that writing is worthwhile and worth prioritizing is huge. And then 3, just more generally speaking, I would say, don't take yourself too seriously, which as a writer, I think it's almost guaranteed that most of us writers are people who were super sensitive, were, so averse to criticism and, constructive or not, we're just so terrified that what we're writing is silly or embarrassing. And I can tell you right now, it probably is. Right. And you just gotta keep writing and writing and writing and writing.
Yeah, and that is such great advice, because I think there are many could be and would be authors who keep their books real close to the chest. They don't want anybody to know. And I was watching something recently with Stephen Greer, who he does a lot to do with UFOs and things of that nature. And he said that there have been inventions that people have held so close to their chest that they just will not share the details of it, that they go to the grave with them. And that's the same with authors. It's like there's many a great book that will never be written because people are afraid of criticism. And in your book writing and your marketing and all that, what would you say are some of the best marketing strategies? Because the Vegan Visibility Show is all about vegan marketing, marketing for vegan businesses. And I'm always looking for unique ways that people get their message out, or common ways that they utilize and it works really well.
Well, I am far from a marketing aficionado, but I'll mention a couple of things that have really worked for me. Number one, some writer friends. Well, okay, even prior to what I was going to say, I formed an authors mastermind group that I meet with every week via Zoom with, we currently have 4 of us total. And every week we talk about what we're grateful for. We talk about our goals, our accomplishments, and our challenges. And so for me, I personally have benefited so much from group support. And so I knew that going into this, writing the book is in many ways the easy part of being a writer. That's the easy part. It's the second part, which is getting the book out into the world, which is the part that's much more challenging, totally different skill set, but it's part of the job. Like, I think I would urge people to not think of that as different from the job of being a writer. That's part of it. It's integral to it. So the more we can embrace that, and I knew for me myself that having group support around that and people to nudge me forward and give me constructive criticism and just suggestions was going to be huge. So I would really urge people to find some community about that. That's not specific to marketing, but you get great marketing suggestions. And one such suggestion that I received from my lovely group of writers was to get bookmarks made for my book, because I was going to be attending a romance writers conference, and they said, bring some bookmarks. You need to have swag at that conference.
Right.
Get some bookmarks. And the other tip that they gave me was make them fun. Make them kind of frilly, like put on a tassel or
got it right here.
and what you're holding in your hand is the result. And I just have to say, I love those bookmarks, and I carry them with me everywhere I go. And to me, they're just such a wonderful marketing tool that, number one, absolutely, I don't think I ever would have conceived of them had it not been for my group. It just wouldn't have occurred to me to get bookmarks made. Even if it did occur to me, it would not have occurred to me to put lace on the ends. And to me, the lace kind of makes the bookmark. I see an unadorned bookmark and I think, oh, that's just so dowdy.
That's so 80s.
So plain, so 80s. Yeah. And so everywhere I go, whether it's to a social gathering or professional event or just out and about,
great idea.
Coffee shops, I just bring them with me everywhere I go. And it really helps that, I love them. So even if I have doubts about my writing and my giftedness, as an author, I love my bookmarks. And so
I think it's a great idea. When I saw that, I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And you just gave me an idea, because one of the places I'm sure many of us have opportunities to talk to people is at the grocery store, when they notice our cart compared to their cart and start having a conversation. And what better than saying, well, this might be of interest to find out more about the vegan lifestyle. So that's a great idea. So give me another tip on marketing that you do.
Let's think. I think it's really, this is rather general, but I think it's just being attuned to opportunities, because I really think there are just a plethora of opportunities out there. And in the past, I would just naysay everything. I would think, oh, that's not going to work. That's not worth the effort. And just to listen when people told me things, as a writer, my marketing has been very, very grassroots and very kind of low budget. As a writer, one of my favorite ways to get my book into the public space is to holds book club discussions. And so, a few book clubs have read my book, and I've gotten to go there in person and, lead a discussion and chat with them, which has been really fun, especially for Marrying Myself, because it's fiction, but it also has, a strong self-help, self-love component. So it just lends itself really well to these group events. And so for me, just learning to talk about my work and just to remember in my head, okay, sometimes it can feel presumptuous to mention to people at a party that I have a book that came out recently. I also know that if I don't mention it, chances are they'll never hear about it. Like Absolutely. If I don't say something. So asking for reviews was a big piece. And I guess that's pretty basic, but pretty important marketing advice for writers. Absolutely. Is reviews on Amazon, particularly. I mean, part of me despises being in bed with, Amazon, but as a author, you got to play the game. And so just asking people for reviews. And, of course, I'm always so happy just to hear that people bought my book, liked my book, have things to talk about with my book. And so I'm always reluctant to ask them for one more thing. But
if they like it, because I realized that, when I'm done reading the book, I'm going to put a review up on Amazon, and you just reminded me of it. And it's not that we don't want to do it. It's like we get so busy in our lives. And, I'll give you one more marketing tip that this one I always encourage my own clients to do, which is you're doing what you're doing right now. Get on podcast shows. And one real nice strategy, and I'm doing this with a client of mine who wrote a book called Scandal in the Shadows, and it's about women in the priesthood. And she actually is a very well-researched, incredible writer. And what we've done is we've looked for people who have been on her own podcast show. She started one about 3 months ago, and we looked at where else they were on podcast shows and where or this one woman was on podcast shows and where she was written about. And so we contacted the journalist and we said, hey, if you liked what Father Ann did, you'll really like what Margaret Mary O'Connor did. So following other authors and seeing where they show up. And so finding authors within your genre and looking at what podcast shows they've been on, because if the podcast host had one person like that, they're bound to have somebody else. Looking for articles that have been written, looking for media releases, things of that nature, and just kind of following the breadcrumbs, if you will. So
yes. Yes, Chrissy, thank you for that advice.
You bet. There's so many more, but this is your show, and it's my show, but you're being and you do have a show. So why don't you tell people about that?
Thank you. Yes, I launched the Vegan Posse podcast last November, and I've had some incredible guests, including one Kathleen Gage, whose episode will be coming out in the next month or two. But it's really been fantastic, because I'm sure this is the case for. It was the case for me and perhaps for you and for a lot of us vegans. It's so easy to feel like we're the only ones who are thinking about these issues, who really care and who are really going about our lives just trying to do the right thing, even in areas that the regular world doesn't notice. And so I wanted to start a podcast that really was global and kind of universal in the sense of highlighting the stories of vegans from around the globe who, like you and me, are doing their best to live lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. And I conceived the name Vegan Posse, for one, just because I like the word posse. And, I myself was kind of desperate for that sense of community. But then when I looked more deeply into the meaning of the word, a posse is typically a group of individuals gathered for peacekeeping purposes. So they're law enforcement. They're gathered together to keep the peace. And I thought that's perfect for a vegan posse because we're not just keeping the peace, we're creating it through our food choices and beyond. And I just have so many fascinating conversations with animal rights activists and vegans at conferences and just out and about. And I just really didn't want those conversations to go to waste. I wanted to bring those stories out into the world. Kind of what motivated me with my novel. I loved my characters and I wanted to get them out into the world and I wanted to get their stories heard. So that's what's happening with the Vegan Posse.
That's wonderful. Well, Chrissy, this has been delightful. And again, please give people your web address so that they can go visit your website and learn more about you.
Yes, thank you. It's ChristineMelanieBenson.com. And my podcast, as you mentioned, is called The Vegan Posse.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Chrissy, this has been delightful. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Thank you for being vegan and thank you for all you're doing for the animals because, one day at a time, we all make a difference. And I want to thank everybody for listening in and watching in. This is Kathleen Gage with the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show, encouraging you to go out and live consciously. Have a great day.
You've been listening to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show. Be sure to subscribe to get notified when the next episode is live. And we always appreciate reviews. Join us next time for more inspiration, education, and motivation to build your business one cruelty-free and healthy person at a time.